the journey I've been on, I've done a lot of personal therapy, talking therapy, which has been very helpful for me.
Yep.
And in the last year or so, I've got heavily into improv.
Yeah.
And I've been noticing this strange crossover between what I've been working on in therapy and what's going on in improv. What I'm noticing is that it's provoking reflection or discovery within myself. Why am I finding this difficult? Why did I want to behave differently in that way, or find this tricky, or so that angle of improv and the connection with therapy has been interesting to me. And I know there are therapeutic approaches around drama, at least. So that's got me a little bit curious in sort of what music therapy really is.
Let's try and get into that stuff, I think. I'm really interested in that because I do consider improv to be much more, for me, than just a hobby. As in, I feel there's a therapeutic benefit.
So, Hugh,
Anthony,
thank you for agreeing to come on my podcast. Very nice to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. It's very nice. You've got a lovely couch.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in a good place here. Yeah, snuggled into the corner. And thanks for suggesting it.
Good. Well, get comfy. And hopefully we'll have an interesting chat.
Okay, that sounded like you were laying down the gauntlet. Get comfy.
So, Hugh, you're a music therapist.
Yes.
So I wonder if we could start by you perhaps just explaining a little bit about how you came to be a music therapist and what that involves.
Yeah, sure. So the short answer to start with is that just over 10 years ago, 2014, I trained as a music therapist at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. So that's in London. And generally the training to become a music therapist is a 2-year full-time MA. There are a few other permutations, but that's kind of the most common. So you go through this quite rigorous training, which involves some placement work, alongside other music therapists in their kind of settings, a lot of theoretical work around child development, different psychological theories, key figures in the development, say, of psychoanalysis, things like that, and a lot of therapeutic work, and the development of lots of your own musical skills. So it's a really, rich, but also quite demanding training that pulls you in different places. One other element I should say is that everyone training as a music therapist has to access their own personal therapy for a certain amount of time. So there's this expectation that you're thinking about your own self, your own identity, and understanding that there can be a lot of stake in the therapeutic relationship. So it's important to do some work on yourself in that period.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the short answer. I did that 2-year training and I qualified in 2016. And since then, I've been working as a music therapist in a range of settings, some mainstream and special school settings, within a charity setting, and most recently in Tame down the road, setting up my own private practice.
What was it specifically about music therapy that, why music therapy as opposed to some other form of therapy, or talking therapy?
Music was and has been a big part of my life for most of the time that I can remember. I started piano lessons with a local village piano teacher when I was, I think, 4 years old. And at that time I was also getting into the local church children's choir. And as time went on, I continued piano lessons throughout my school days. I sang in lots of different choirs. I also took up other instruments, the trombone, the French horn. And I guess as well as enjoying the accomplishment of developing my skills on these instruments, I think I was aware, especially in my teenage years, but a little bit before that as well, that music had a really significant part to play in me being myself and understanding myself, and that there were certain sort of pieces of music that could really channel my emotions, or that when I played them, for example, I might be close to tears. And there was something about music cutting through to some really powerful experiences that I was having that maybe words or other forms of expression weren't able to do. So I think I had some understanding that I had this, this really close connection with music.
Yeah.
And I remember as a teenager as well, sometimes I used to, at school, for example, if I was really fed up with something or was really angry and pissed off about something someone had said, I would often escape to the music school and I would let rip on the piano.
Yeah.
And that's when I kind of started to do these free improvisations. I wasn't playing single pieces. I was just kind of taking stuff out on the piano, and the piano was helping me out in some way to have that kind of release and processing what I was feeling. I guess it was sort of the musical equivalent of going into a small room and screaming out loud.
Yeah.
But I was doing it with the piano, and it was quite cathartic.
Yeah.
So there was definitely an element of that growing up. A couple of other elements I'll add. So when I studied my bachelor's degree at university, I did
Which was in
Durham. So it was in it was technically combined arts. I had two major subjects, which were music and French. I was really into French at school as well, and interested in other languages as well. But in my final year there was this option to do an introductory module to music therapy, and it was taught by someone I now know is a really renowned music therapist in the field. And by far, in my final year of university, this was the module that really kind of engaged me and gripped me in ways that other elements of my degree, which I still enjoyed, just didn't. There was something about it tapping into the whole package, yes, my musical skills, but also using music as a way to connect with other people, particularly vulnerable people who might need other ways to express themselves and interact, beyond the use of words, and where music could be such a powerful way of doing that. So I kept that experience pretty strongly, and I was really lucky that when I first moved to London after graduating, and I started working for a children's charity kids company, through a connection of my mum, who knew someone who worked for this charity, they were able to put me in touch with two music therapists that were already working with the charity, and I was able to get some initially work experience with them, and then it led to a kind of a part-time paid role. I'm still in contact with both of them. They're brilliant musicians, really, really great people, and they were very inspirational in terms of their work as music therapists. I guess then the other thing that I would just add to complete this is that I did wait before I decided to train as a music therapist. I was working in London for 6 years, different kinds of jobs, before I then committed to the training.
Yeah.
I'd done a lot of work with children and young people by that point, not always using music. I was considering going down the child psychotherapy route, and there are various trainings I could have accessed for that, which could have involved certain elements of not just music, but other kinds of creative play, but would have been quite a different training with quite a different focus, and lots of focus on talking as well. But there was something about just me wanting to hold on to the importance that music played for me.
Yeah.
And my connection with that module at Durham and the experiences I'd had with those two other music therapists, and thinking, like, out of all my options here, this does feel like the one that's best suited to who I am as a person and what I can offer. And I guess there were some practical things that worked out as well in terms of where I could study and the timing of the study, so that made sense. But that's what eventually drew me into music therapy.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. I'm guessing that the aims of music therapy are broadly similar to the aims of therapy in general, in that you're trying to help an individual who's come to you with their psychological growth, perhaps with emotional things, overcoming some sort of difficulty they're facing.
Yeah.
So could you say a bit more, or perhaps get into the nuts and bolts of what happens in music therapy? What is the emphasis on music tapping into or offering that makes it different from other approaches?
That's a really good question. And you're right that a lot of the time, the kinds of reasons for referral or reasons for accessing music therapy could be shared with other forms of therapy, including talking therapy or other arts-based therapies. So there's some sort of challenge, difficulty around someone's mental health or their development, their self-esteem. And there's an idea of trying to find a therapeutic provision that will be able to support with that. I guess what's shared, and that doesn't have to involve the music, is that there is a real focus on the working relationship, and that this is kind of paramount. So the consistency, the trust, the safety that hopefully can be built over time between therapist and client, that in itself is of inherent value in terms of offering something secure for the client to build on, and that can hopefully offer perhaps a different blueprint for that person in terms of the way they relate to someone else, the way that they see themselves, the way that they might be understood, accepted, validated, which can then hopefully in the long term help them to kind of develop perhaps a more robust self, a bit more internal resilience, to then move on and deal with some of the challenges that they have. So there are some kind of core principles which are shared with lots of other therapies, particularly where you're working with someone over a longer period, and it's not just kind of 4, 6, 12 sessions. And actually there's this opportunity to really get to know someone and see them in lots of different lights, where they will come to sessions in lots of different moods, with lots of different things going on in their lives. So this often weekly therapy session has this opportunity to bear witness to that person in all different aspects of themselves. Perhaps what's more unique about music therapy is that the music therapist's primary tool, and what we are kind of most specifically trained in, is the use of music. So in a music therapy room, generally there'll be a whole wealth of different instruments around, from like piano, guitar, lots of different percussion, some more kind of sensory instruments. There might be some music technology available, apps on tablets, things like that, depending on how you work and who you're working with. Yeah. So lots of opportunities to make sound and make music. And we are offering this opportunity for someone to express themselves and connect in the therapeutic relationship without necessarily having to use words, although they might use words alongside them. And we're offering this chance for someone to try and find a sense of playfulness within themselves, where they can respond to what's happening in the moment. I guess we might come on to this in terms of the links with improv and improvisation. But not all, but a lot of forms of music therapy are improvisation based. So the idea is to try and capture someone in where they're at in that particular moment, and support it and foster it and bring it to life and accept it for what it is. Now, what that looks like does depend. So some people it might be this free improvisation when no particular rules are set. This might be the equivalent of what we would call in psychoanalysis free association. I guess historically, with Freud's version of psychoanalysis, where you've got someone comes in, lies back on the couch, and the idea is that they can just let their mind wander and free associate. So just see what happens as they talk, and that through that free association, important themes will emerge that the therapist can help to interpret and draw together and help to understand. So there can be kind of musical equivalents of that, this free association, and ways that a music therapist might help to try and understand the way that the client is playing. How are they playing their music? Are they being particularly assertive? Are they being quite controlling in their music? Are they needing to make sure that they govern everything that happens? Are they being sort of quite tentative? Are they sort of jumping around from one thing to the next, struggling to focus on one thing? Or are they getting completely immersed to the extent that they block out whatever I'm doing or whatever's happening in the rest of the world? Are they very stultified in their playing? Are they kind of just always going back to the same thing and repeating the same patterns? So we might think about what does their music and the way they're playing mean about who they are and the challenge that they come to therapy with. How do those two relate?
Right. I'll just have a go at saying some things and we can see whether I'm understanding. So I've had quite a lot of experience of talking therapy.
Yeah.
In talking therapy, you as the person receiving therapy are probably doing more of the talking, and you're being listened to a lot. But it still seems that, in a sense, you're trying to construct a sort of a narrative or a meaning. You're trying to sort of impose some kind of order and make some sense of events.
Yeah.
Whereas what strikes me is you're describing more about expression, and that's somehow providing information about what's there at a sort of subconscious, deeper level, finding access perhaps to these deep parts of ourselves, so that they can be brought to light and we can see what might be there within the experience of someone. So I guess one thing that's striking me is a sort of slightly different emphasis, less perhaps on making meaning and order, which language is very prone towards in a sense, and slightly more of an emphasis on allowing expression to be given to things which perhaps it's difficult to find the words for.
Definitely. And this question of making meaning, I mean, I think I will be coming back to it for the rest of my days, because it is a constant challenge, because music, it's there and it's gone. It's this quite ethereal entity, if you like.
Yeah.
And there is no one fixed way of understanding or interpreting it. And hopefully as music therapists, we have a bit more experience or skills or expertise in thinking about it in different ways. But that's not to say that we have a definitive answer as to what anyone's music categorically means. So there is always a question of how do we make sense of this person's music? Sometimes to help frame that, we might think of not just how do we make sense of this person's music, but how do we make sense of this person's music in this relationship? And I guess that's where I was referring to a little bit to the dynamics of the relationship. So, for example, if someone came into the room and they started playing something, and then me as the therapist is thinking, okay, they're playing that, I'm going to join them and accompany them in what they're doing and do this. How does the client then respond to that? Are they okay with me being part of that? Can we go on a kind of musical journey together? Is my playing going to then interrupt them and they feel like, actually, well, no, there's no space for them anymore? Are they going to want to reject me and say, well, no, that's not right? And sometimes quite literally shut me up and say, no, you listen. I'll play it.
Okay.
Which could be a very legitimate thing to do. They need to be just heard for their music and they want the therapist to kind of bear witness to it without joining in. But that can be quite revealing in terms of sense making and dynamics and how that might relate to other experiences or other relationships that person has had, or what they need to get from therapy.
In my experience with talking therapy, there's something very valuable about the experience of feeling seen and heard.
Yeah.
And a good therapist hopefully makes someone feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're describing something slightly more than that, which is a kind of collaborative. You're participating in something together. The music is giving you a space where you are both collaborating in something greater than both of you, something you're making together in some sense.
Yeah. Well, and that is definitely, it might not happen that often that you sort of reach this pinnacle, but when it does happen, it's a really, really momentous sort of moment in therapy sometimes. For some, it might take a really long time to get there. Yeah. Sometimes there might be kind of little sparks of it early on, and then it's sort of lost somehow. I'm trying to find that connection. But I was talking to a counsellor recently about this, and we were kind of comparing notes on, our approaches in therapy. And I guess this is a fundamental difference, that whereas if you were in a therapy session, a personal therapy session, I would say, which is talking based, and you were talking at the same time as your counsellor for a long time, it wouldn't work, or I imagine it would feel pretty odd.
Yes. And
perhaps uncomfortable, perhaps invasive. You perhaps want to shut the counsellor up and say, well, hang on, no, this is my space. Can you just listen for a minute?
Yeah.
And that might be the case in music therapy as well, like I was referring to. But if as a music therapist I can find a way to come alongside that person's music, which is, I guess, complementary, that might be a word we could use, as in I've got a sense of perhaps the feeling of this music and the sound world and the emotional world of it. And hopefully what I'm doing is showing that I'm really taking notice of that. I'm not just coming in willy-nilly with my own sort of music. I'm really trying to take care to join this person's music and support it in some way and foster it and nurture it. Then that actually, it could, as you say, make it greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And that person might get the sense of, finally, or yes, that is what I am saying through this music. You have heard me, and your music has shown me that you've heard me more than you just saying in words. Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think I understand. We've been able to share this experience together. And I guess that experiential element in the music making is what separates it from talking therapy. I'm not at all suggesting that a therapist and client in talking therapy couldn't have a really, really close relationship in terms of sort of, mutual understanding.
Yeah.
But there is something different in music making.
Yeah. I wonder if it might be a good point to broaden the discussion a little bit, because some of the things you're saying are definitely making me think of improv.
Yeah.
And improv is something we've both got involved with and is how we met each other.
Yeah.
And you've written some interesting things about what you enjoy about improv and also how it overlaps, I guess, with your work as a music therapist, and some interesting parallels you're noticing.
Yeah.
I've collected some interesting quotes from you in various articles that I found online. This one, for example, you say that your approach to music therapy is broadly improvisational, both on a micro and macro level.
Yes.
Do you want to expand on that a little bit before we then start perhaps diving into some of the parallels between music therapy and improv?
Yeah, sure. So on a micro level, I embrace musical improvisation in a session. It could be a 30-second, it could be a 3-minute, it could be a 20-minute improvisation. I am open to making something up based on what is happening in that moment in relation to the client. Of course, I've got my musical training behind me. I've got my own interest in music and certain sort of styles of music that I'm more accomplished with than others. So it's not like I'm starting from a completely blank canvas, but I'm trying to make my music responsive to the moment rather than dictate, okay, this situation suggests we need to have this musical structure in place. This situation means I think you need to play that instrument and I'll play that instrument. No, I'm seeing what emerges from the client's instinct around the room of what they want to play, and I'm trying to join that. So that's, I guess, what I mean by the micro element of improvisation.
Yeah.
On a macro basis, what I mean is that the overall session structure is generally very open. I would caveat that with the fact that certain individuals I work with need some structure to sessions to feel safe, particularly some of the children and young people I work with. So we might actually have a set structure of a particularly opening routine that we do, an activity or a musical game or something. We might have something we do at the end. We might have our repertoire of activities we do.
Yeah.
So that's my caveat. And in that case, it's more the micro improvisation and less the macro improvisation. But with a lot of people I work with, we start a session with no agenda other than that we're starting now at 2:00 and we're finishing at 2:50 or 2:30. So there's this sense of, where is this session going to take us? And even beyond that, where are these 6 sessions going to take us? Where is this period of work going to take us? I still have therapeutic aims that might have been sort of established early on in therapy. So I still have that floating around, and I'm still hoping that we can work on our therapeutic aims. It's just that I'm hoping to integrate them in a way that's more natural to the moment, rather than say, today's the session that we work on X, and then next week we can work on Y. It's more that we develop this relationship of the openness, and then in between sessions, I'm trying to make sense of it. I might talk to my own supervisor to get a second opinion, think about what's happening, thinking about opportunities where I might sort of shift something, try something different, challenge a client about something, question them. But it's not set out.
Yeah, and is that partly because the true goal isn't always immediately clear at the beginning? So you might not quite know what it is that you need to achieve with this particular client.
That's absolutely true, yeah. I would have an assessment period, say 4 to 6 sessions. And then after that period, that's where I might set some aims. And sometimes they sort of stay consistent throughout the period. But sometimes it might become clear after a few more sessions that actually what's more realistic, perhaps what's even more important in this therapy, seems to be that we work on this, or that I help to give this person an experience of that. So that's where, it's important for me to just be upfront. Another element of that I should say, and I wrote about a little bit in one of my blogs, is the analogy of a chauffeur as opposed to co-piloting. Because I work a lot with children and young people, it's not the person accessing therapy with me who has actually started the process. It might be their parent. It might be a teacher,
Right.
who's then referred me for this particular set of reasons. But the young person may or may not be in the loop about that, or fully understand that, or be okay with all of that.
So agree with the...
Or agree,
analysis.
exactly. So then it's a question of, and it will take some time for us to figure out, why do you think you're here, or why are we doing these sessions together, and what can we work on here? What could this help you with? And so it's not a straight trajectory of A to B. Part of the challenge might also be communicating with the person that's referred the child. My take from what I've gathered so far and starting to get to know your child is that probably this space could support them with this, but actually it might be that I don't feel I'm the right person to help with the other thing or something else, or actually that's not as important.
You've been explaining this improvisational approach,
Yeah,
both on a micro level and a macro. I guess at a certain point, relatively recently, you found yourself in an improvisation class, having a go at that for the first time. Do you want to say a bit about what your first impressions were of improv, and where you started to find these intriguing parallels or sort of lessons that are kind of overlapping with your work?
Yeah. I mean, again, I wrote about this the very first time that I went to improv. I screwed up on the timings, and so I arrived half an hour late. There were about maybe 5 or 6 people in full flow of quite a zany improvisation game.
Do you remember what they were doing?
Yes, I do. It's this game, something like, yes, but can you give me more?
Okay.
Do you know that one where
I'm not sure.
someone chooses a movement which might be accompanied by a short word or phrase, and then the other person just has to say, yes, can you give me more? So they then do that movement in a more exaggerated fashion until it sort of really, really erupts into something that's sort of completely wild and melodramatic. And so there were maybe a handful of pairs around the room doing these things. And I guess the combination of sounds and movement, well, it was pretty eccentric. And because I hadn't had any of the warm-up or the preamble, it was a bit of a fight or flight moment for me. I'm really glad to say that I just said and apologised for being late, and then Matt, who facilitates the session, helped me to find a way in. But I guess part of telling that story is to show that, for me, even though I was comfortable and familiar with the world of improvisation in music, this was definitely a new territory for me, and certainly came with quite a lot of anxiety. That might be connected to, I suppose, starting any new activity, but particularly an activity where there's an element of giving of yourself quite a lot and leaping into the unknown and trying things out with words and actions with people you don't know that could be quite unfamiliar. Yeah, I've been going on and off for about 18 months now. I'm just really glad I stuck with it. And I guess to draw a link with something that we discussed earlier, which was about, making meaning within an interaction, especially when it's in a non-verbal form, like in music. I often find in improv as well, there's a real invitation and encouragement to not be preoccupied by the meaning and the sense of what's happening in the moment. I guess what I mean is just to try and concentrate on what's happening right there and then in the moment without worrying about the broader significance of it. And if you're able to do that, generally, there will be something quite powerful, sometimes, magical that happens in that moment, and that afterwards you can draw lots of meanings from and understand in different ways. But if you were preoccupied by the meanings in the moment, you probably would have lost a certain opportunity there.
Are you making a connection there with the point you were saying about in your music therapy, you have to, in some sense, let go of your theories or ideas about where the course of the therapy is leading and be more focused on what's happening in this session, and being open really to whatever direction you want to go in. So similarly with an improv scene, by being really faithful to just what is coming up in the here and now and letting go of trying to make sense of or control the overall narrative and where the kind of endpoint might be.
Yeah, that you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly it. I guess try not to be master of the scene. Yeah. Try not to be the star and control it. Be the funny one. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like it when I get the validation of a group of people laughing at something that I've done or said.
Yeah.
But I often, get those unexpectedly. It's not always when I've just thought of a brilliant gag. In fact, it's very rarely when I've thought of a brilliant gag. It's more that I've just immersed myself in the scene.
Yeah.
And then something funny or moving has come from that scene. And, bring it back to therapy. I've had recent examples of this where I've sort of undermined my own general approach by going into a session as the therapist thinking we really need to talk about this, or I think we really need to tackle that, which is not necessarily, a bad thing, but in the way I've done it, I've lost sense of the possibility of letting the client drive things, and I've stopped listening properly or following properly what's happening in the moment in the room, which could have told me so much more and informed that discussion that I wanted to have. And so my agenda has kind of trumped the opportunities or possibilities we've had for connection and meaning making.
Yeah, so it's almost like you miss an opportunity because you're so fixed on your own particular idea of what's needed or where we should be going. I think in improv as well, if you go in with that mindset of trying to steer it, then not only are you probably imposing too much and taking too much control, and which doesn't help the other people you're performing with, you're also potentially losing the possibility of something greater. Because is it not the case that what audiences really love when they're watching improv is the sense of something totally unexpected emerging, which is greater than any of the individuals involved? Because it's got tiny little bits, like the ingredients coming from all of these little contributions. And the 2 or 3 or 4 or however many improvisers who are building the scene together are collectively engaged in this process of respecting the reality that they're creating together. Even if that reality is dubious, full of holes, makes no sense. There's something about the act of almost treating it as something sacred with seriousness. I've noticed that, when people are learning improvisation, they struggle with this. It's like allowing yourself to take the things that happen and the claims that people make, just sort of hoovering them all up and capturing them all and taking them deadly seriously. This is the reality. We must respect it, we must cherish it, we must take it to its absurd logical conclusion, not being afraid to just be really consistent with whatever has come up.
You are a lemming with magical powers.
I am a lemming with magical powers, and I'm going to explore all of the consequences of being a lemming with magical powers. And how satisfying it is to watch that done well, and the strange, wonderful places it takes you.
And you talked about the magic being for the audience of really seeing something unexpected emerge. And I think for that to really hit home, it has to be unexpected for the performers as well. It can't be a crafted surprise. It's like everyone on stage until that fraction of a second before, until that moment. We were both talking about missed opportunities when you're not in a place where you can really respond to the person that you're improvising with. In music therapy, we might say everything is communication. A simplistic example of this might be trying to make sense of challenging behaviour in a school environment, trying to take a step back from whatever the particular incident of challenging behaviour was. Okay, what is that person communicating? What are they telling us? It is, even though it might be a painful or a disruptive or an aggressive one, it's nonetheless an offering of sorts, showing us something about them and who they are. I'm just thinking about listening and taking seriously whatever it is that's being offered to you and trying to work with it. And as improvisers, we might have lots of different offers at any one moment. And can we work with them as they are gifts? There's something that we could make something of.
Yeah, for sure. The accepting of offers as opposed to the blocking of them.
Yeah.
A question that's been formulating in my head a little bit is, I can see that you're suggesting that improv is similar in some way to the way you need to behave as a music therapist, in terms of being very present to the client, letting go of your own ideas about the direction it should go in, so as to be really open to reading the offers that the client's making.
Yeah.
But is there another area here where the experience of being the improviser in a scene is a little bit akin to what therapy is like, or has something therapeutic about it? I'm thinking, for example, of what it can be like in an improv scene to make an offer and have that offer subtly rejected. Or just the fact that in an improv scene, you are in a group building something together. So it does throw up a lot of scope for challenge. You know, you talked about the fear involved with going to an improv session for the first time. And I think that's something with improv that never really goes away entirely, isn't it? Because every new scene, you're being quite vulnerable and you're opening yourself up to the unexpected. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to be said. And I guess also another thing that's going on is you are trying to be quite instinctive. You're trying not to think too much. You're trying to go with your gut. And that also is a scary thing to do, because you're revealing more about yourself, and you're potentially revealing things about yourself that have kind of slipped through your inner sensor. And that can be a bit scary.
Yeah.
So these elements of improv, as someone who's experienced quite a lot of therapy, remind me of the therapeutic process of having to be quite courageous in trying something difficult and then clashing into experiences which might be a little bit difficult, like, why did I behave that way? Or, you know, or did I accept that person's offer, or did I offend them by blocking it?
Yeah. Oh, so much. I think
I did open up quite a few different strands.
No, but it's a mindful, but it's so fascinating. Two things that I want to pick up on. One is the group dynamics element. So whilst I would say broadly over the 18 months, I've had a really positive experience of improv, there have definitely been sessions or moments within sessions where I've been wrestling with difficult, quite conflicting emotions. And sometimes where I've thought, downright, that did not feel good. It could be either something I've witnessed or something I've been part of. I just, no. And it might be to do with, a clash of personalities with someone, or it feels, someone hasn't approached a scene or a game with the same spirit as I was hoping for, where our expectations weren't aligned, or where I felt like I needed a bit more support or guidance and I felt I was a bit left on my own. I could go on. So I think it definitely does tap into, different elements of ourselves. But perhaps potentially any group could, but there's maybe something about improv and the nature of improv, and that it does force us to perhaps be a bit more vulnerable in some ways, a bit more, as you say, courageous in some ways. That it's hard. Just like personal therapy is hard if we're really committed to it.
Yeah.
Because we're going to kind of have to confront the rough edges of ourselves. Something I was, mentioning to you before is that when I do have those moments of feeling angry, or it could be hurt, or it could be feeling a bit helpless, all those kinds of things. Sometimes my immediately thought might be the sort of scapegoating thought of, oh yeah, it's because of X. I was in a scene with them and it's their fault. Or, that person, just isn't on the same wavelength, and that was unfair what they said. But I guess when I come to think of it, it's more a question of, oh, okay. And this is the sort of harsh realization. Oh, is that just because it's kind of my thing? And I know in these circumstances, something in me always gets a little bit sort of triggered, or that sort of comment will always rub me up the wrong way, even though there's nothing really wrong with that sort of comment. Like, everyone else seems to be okay with it.
Yeah.
There might be some legitimate concerns I have, but there might also be something that's very personal to me. So that was one of the things I was going to say. But the thing I I find that's very cathartic in improv, and I think I would find very hard within personal therapy, or I have in the past, because I've had quite a lot of personal therapy before and when I was training as a music therapist. Something I find that improv can allow is just giving that permission to go into different parts of ourselves through the medium of a different character.
Yeah.
Or a different set of circumstances. For me, it's the angry or rageful Hugh, which I guess is there, like for most people, there's a part of us that can get tapped up into a very angry state, but it might not come up in a very healthy way in the rest of my life. I'm often sort of like pushing it right down or sort of covering it up in different ways. So I do find that when I'm able to get into a character, and I haven't planned this per se, but it's happened organically through a scene where I can tap into something of that emotion, I might realise afterwards, I really needed that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't necessarily aware of it at the time, but there'd been something that had been bubbling that was really winding me up. And that has allowed me to have the space to express it in a way that was hopefully safe, because it was still, related to the scene, and hopefully, I haven't really hurt anyone or been aggressive with anyone, but I've still been able to express it.
Yes.
You can think of lots of examples of that with other emotions, not just anger, where it could be real hurt or a real desperation or longing for something, where these characters really helped me to think about that and evoke it.
And I wonder if, as well as being cathartic, so giving a space to express something that needs to be felt or expressed, there's an element as well of improv providing a safe space just for practicing and trying on different facets of human experience. So if you do scenes involving status, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, if you're quite a sort of polite and deferential person, it's quite it's quite a fun experiment to see what is it like to inhabit an extremely high status individual who sort of goes around sort of on a level above everybody else. So there's an element of scope for stretching what's comfortable, trying things out.
I'd love just to hear a bit more about that, because I think there's a big connection again with that in music therapy. Often I would think about or talk about music therapy trying to provide an opportunity for people to explore different aspects of their identity. And I suppose that's kind of what you're talking about there, particularly untapped areas of identity, where we might not be so used to inhabiting those worlds or those emotions, but being able to practice in a safe way is actually quite helpful and can kind of get us thinking about who we are and who we'd like to be. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, with the Awkward Actors in Oxford, we play with these status scenes because they're entertaining to watch. One of the ones we do is, we call it status swap. One person starts as a very high status character, the other is very low. And we do a scene where we intentionally shift positions. And it's really fun identifying this moment or this reason where the shift is subtly going to start happening. So you might be a very snooty boss looking down on your lower status companion, but then they plant a little seed of doubt, like, oh, did you realise you're wearing your socks back to front? This little seed of doubt, you've chipped away at their security. But when we practice those scenes, we've also done a status battle, which is where you're trying to raise your status against another person. Or it could be trying to lower your status against another person, kind of go as low as you can. Oh no, I'm the worst, I'm just terrible, You're trying to do all these little copes of like low status. I find the status battle of hiring your states very uncomfortable. I don't like that. So I think for me that's been instructive. I prefer to be lowering my status a little bit. That realization has been helpful, because you definitely can consciously try and higher your status a bit and do things which project more confidence. And I found improv helpful in that regard. I almost think if you're in a situation where you feel a bit uncomfortable about something, you can just pretend you're in an improv scene and just treat it as if you're going to act as a very high status character. I'm not I'm not suggesting people take this too far, but I think it can be helpful, realizing that there's scope for stretching out of the normal kind of modes of behavior that often we don't really challenge, perhaps, because they're so familiar to us.
I can totally see the scope for that. I suppose one element as well might just be the fact that within these scenes, if you get used to the unknown and for letting things happen, I can just imagine there are certain circumstances outside improv where it might be a little bit easier to let go.
Yes.
Even if you have a certain expectation about how something is going to go, it could be a meeting or a party or, I don't know, a dinner, whatever it is, but that you're able to get in a place where you go, okay, well, this is what I was hoping for, but clearly in front of my eyes, I'm seeing that, such and such pitched up late, such and such didn't want to come. They're behaving completely differently to how I expected. This is what I've been dealt. This is the offer. What am I going to do with it? I suppose that's the question. Not how can I sort of get to grips with what I wanted. It's like, what can I do with right now? And if you feel comfortable working with that in a flexible way, because it does require some flexibility, doesn't it? And sort of some openness, and seeing the opportunity there rather than what's been missed from your expectation. Again, I say it's easier in theory than it is in practice, but I can just imagine how that could be a real asset to someone. I'd see it in people I know who are able to do that much more fluently than I might be able to do, for example. Just deal with what's going on and work with it.
Yeah.
And get something much more from that particular moment than if you're still sort of stuck in where you wanted it to go.
Yeah. I think also as an antidote to perfectionism, improv has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
Because, again, as you were saying, just this being in the moment, letting go of the long-term plan, responding to the here and now.
Yeah.
And that involves accepting that what happens might not match up to your particular idea in a moment. Sometimes it will go better, sometimes it won't go as well. But there's this thing in improv that you just throw things away and move on to the next scene. And I found that helpful. Still challenging, to be honest, especially after a show, the next day, sort of seeing, it could have been so much better. Oh, if I'd said that.
Oh, yes.
That's still a challenge. But I think just doing lots of improv, it's definitely giving me a lot of exposure to just this sort of repetition of go again, let go again,
Yeah.
And that, I think, is proving helpful for me. Yeah.
I went to improv last night, and it was, I think, the first time I'd done any improv for maybe 3.5, 4 weeks. I felt afterwards there is an element of improv which I think is a bit like a muscle, and you need to keep training it. Because I realised afterwards there were just some things I was kind of out of practice. It's not about specific things I necessarily said or did, it's just like I wasn't fully in the improv spirit, and I think I was probably maybe a little bit more anxious than I would have been if I was going every week or every fortnight on a consistent basis. And you can get used to dealing with certain scenes or certain expectations and feel more adept in yourself. I can see the value of really committing to some kind of improv-based practice.
Yeah. We're nearly at 3:00.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Final thoughts?
Well, it's been very interesting learning more about music therapy, I must say. I think improv, for both of us at sort of similar moments in our life, has been something we've discovered, and we're finding these interesting connections with what we do professionally, but also with life.
Yeah.
And it's for sure a very rich topic. I feel there's much more we could have explored, actually.
I know, this is the painful thing, isn't it? It's a bit like you were saying just now, afterthoughts. I'll probably leave and drive home and think, why didn't I talk about this? I would definitely be open to a part 2, whether it's in front of the screen or just in the pub.
Me too.
But just talking about this a bit more. Because likewise with music therapy, I think there's lots more I'd definitely like to say and share about different permutations and circumstances. And love to hear more about sort of your improv work. Because whilst we've overlapped a little bit, I know there's a lot of stuff that you've done separate to that, and I'm really keen to hear about that as well. And I'm sure other people will be interested in hearing.
Well, I'm up for that.
Yeah.
So to be continued then.
Yeah, TBC. All right, but thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Yeah.
Cheers, Anthony.